Back in E3 2018, Xbox was addressing their biggest problem going into their last generation, which is we are not releasing first-party games consistently enough, and they're not being good enough to compare to the competition. They announced, I think, around 5 studios that they were acquiring, including the IPs that would come with them. They continued their acquisitions in 2019, and then in 2020, they announced the big one, ZeniMax, with all the basically Bethesda's properties and studios. And with those 3 years of acquisition buildup, how has the following 3 years been? Because Redfall has been this big label of this is why Xbox doesn't produce great games. Well, let's see if that is really the case and start with 2020. 2020 was a year that Xbox was really relying on their Xbox game publishing studio with a bunch of partnerships, making a bunch of first-party IPs with other studios that they don't own, but just simply partner with to make a first-party title. We got 2 mega hits with Ori and the Will of the Wisps and Microsoft Flight Simulator being 2 of the most highly reviewed games of the year. We got 2 good games with Gears Tactics and Tell Me Why, and then 3 fine games with Battletoads, Minecraft Dungeons, and Bleeding Edge. I personally think Bleeding Edge was kind of a big miss, and it's worth knowing that Bleeding Edge is the only game that was developed by one of those newly acquired studios, being Ninja Theory. 2020 averaged out to be a very strong year, aka really good, strictly speaking, in terms of reviews. 2021 was the year that Xbox earned Metacritic's Publisher of the Year. It was a very complicated year because Microsoft Flight Simulator re-released to consoles, which again reviewed great, and Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop were 2 games from Bethesda that, while they owned them at the time, they were PlayStation exclusive. So I'm going to leave those 3 games out of this equation because of their complexity. But if they were a part of this year, it still applies with the final rating, because it looks like there were only 4 first-party games that year aside from those 3. Psychonauts 2 got nominated for Game of the Year, Forza Horizon 5 won IGN's Game of the Year, and Halo Infinite won the People's Choice Awards at the Game Awards. The weakest of the 4 was Age of Empires 4 for PC, and that game reviewed with a strong, aka it was good, but the other 3 got very high ratings. I know you want to say something about Halo Infinite, but just at the time, it was great. At the time. So 2021 gets a mighty rating from OpenCritic. Now, last year in 2022, many deemed as a year that Xbox was just not present. It seems that they only released 3 first-party titles last year. As Dusk Falls and Grounded with its full release both got reviewed around 8 or 10, give or take, and got strong ratings in OpenCritic, while Pentiment was reviewing mighty. So even with the fewer releases, technically review-wise speaking, it was still a strong year. Now we are finally in 2023, where the year kicks off with a potential Game of the Year contender with Hi-Fi Rush getting a mighty score on OpenCritic, Minecraft Legends following up with a fair score, being like this is okay, and then Redfall getting a weak score, like this is actually bad, I would pass. And when you look at the list of games, Redfall is the first bad game that has been released since 2020 by Xbox first parties. 7 were mighty, 5 were strong, 4 were fair, and 1 was weak. And the only one that was weak was Redfall.
Kaboom! You've been lawyered.
Now, that is not me trying to defend Xbox and make a case that Redfall is literally the only bad game that came from first-party studios the past 3 years, but technically that's true. But the question we're hitting here is, why did Redfall specifically set people off so hard? Let's see if you can guess the answer in the comments before I say it here, because I also have a solution to the problem. And it's not as simple as you think. By the way, Samurai Kibiji, I like to speculate on Xbox and other games with you. It's Zelda Week, holy crap. So subscribe if you want to be a part of a community that respects each other's opinions and doesn't try to correct each other's opinions. And recently, Phil Spencer was on an interview with Kinda Funny that everybody kind of blew up about. And one thing he said during the interview was really interesting, which was he will fight on not interfering with their studio's creativity. He admitted the faults of so many things, but the one thing he really stood for is they do not want to interfere with their studios, tell them what to make, and just let them do their own thing and support whatever their visions are, which can probably lead to the problem that we're having right now if you're an Xbox fan. Because what a lot of gamers are doing is comparing Xbox to their main competitor, PlayStation. This other platform that has these exclusives that are not just reviewing well, just like Xbox. They both have games that they've been publishing that review well, but they have those games being big blockbuster third-party titles that are widely marketed that people are talking about. Because while Pentiment got a 10 out of 10 from a few places, it was also a very niche game that a lot of people aren't interested in or bothered playing. But then you see a game like God of War Ragnarok that gets nominated for Game of the Year, Twitter's all over the place with it, there's all these marketing things with Ben Stiller in trailers. PlayStation has become this place that kind of tries to guarantee its users the biggest titles and that we're going to use this hardware to make the most stunning titles you will see thanks to that hardware. They're committed to that vision that I think a lot of Xbox fans have been craving. So even though Xbox has been publishing games that are reviewing super well, they look to Redfall as this big first-party Bethesda Xbox exclusive that's next-gen only, and for that reason, the expectations were so high for it, the hopes for it were so high, that it really impacted the big problem that Xbox has, which is not well-reviewed games. It's having those big AAA blockbuster ones. I would say the biggest Xbox big blockbuster AAA titles the past couple of years has been Halo Infinite, which was cross-gen, so they had to make it work on the Xbox One, and it reviewed well at launch, but it didn't have that long-lasting effect that previous Halos have had. And Forza Horizon 5, which was a game that reviewed insanely well, maybe the highest reviewed game from Xbox the past couple of years. However, it was a driving game. It didn't have that massive wide market appeal. And then we come to the question, why did Redfall become such a big deal? Redfall was the first big Bethesda first-party Xbox exclusive, next-gen exclusive too, with that $70 price tag. And because of that, the expectations for it became much higher than it just being the next game from Arcane Studios, who is a very well-acclaimed studio, and that's another part of this, is that the next game from Arcane, and the first one of theirs being under the Xbox banner, it was a miss. That was a note that Phil touched upon in the interview, where becoming a first-party studio is apparently just going to bring so much more pressure onto those teams to really deliver, and I really sympathize with the teams that are gonna have to do that, because I'm sure Arcane got a lot of hate and stuff. And it's true, becoming a first-party studio adds a lot of pressure. It adds a lot of new expectations, if you will. And a lot of the studios that Xbox acquired were in mid-development with their games, like Bleeding Edge, like Redfall, like Outer Worlds. They had to finish these games, and Xbox would help them where they can, but they just weren't a part of that process for long enough to really maybe give them the proper resources to do it. But the other half of this, it's not just about these big AAA titles, but what big AAA titles do is showcase what the console can do. Other than Forza Horizon 5 and Microsoft Flight Simulator, it doesn't seem like there has been a game to really push what the Series X can do, what the Series S can do at 1080p, and just what this next generation of Xbox can truly power our dreams with, you know, their tagline. Meanwhile, on PlayStation 5, you see titles, even cross-gen, that are seriously some of the most gorgeous things you'll see. Horizon Forbidden West is the most gorgeous game I have ever played in my life. Did I enjoy it as much as lower graphic games? No, but just visually, I could recognize how the hell did they do this? Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart looks like a Pixar movie. God of War Ragnarok has some great freaking cutscenes and animations. These are things that Xbox hasn't really demonstrated to its audience, and I think that is the other half of the problem. And this is something I hear a lot. Game Pass is the problem. Game Pass isn't the problem. Horizon Forbidden West, that same game I said is the most visually stunning game I have ever played in my life, and it's open world, was supposedly made for around $121 million. God of War Ragnarok costed apparently just over $200 million to make. You know how much Game Pass generates every single month? $250 million or more. So a single month of Game Pass funds the budget of a first-party game that Xbox has proposed. They want to release big budgeted AAA first-party games every quarter of the year. And 4 months of Game Pass covers that. The remaining 8 months covers other expenses like other day ones or operating expenses and so on. There's a math video I did about that, so go check that out after this. So let's put it all together. If Game Pass isn't the problem, if reviews aren't the problem, then how does Xbox get people to stop talking about this issue that they have? One part of the solution is big graphic showcases. Hellblade 2 is our money on that. Like, that is the most visually stunning game that they have shown thus far, and hopefully it is a great game alongside those great visuals. But games like Hellblade is what we need to get, and from more studios than just Ninja Theory, which I think the Coalition is another safe bet on that, because that is made up of a studio that knows the Unreal Engine almost like no other. Those are the people that made Gears of War, by the way. The second part of the solution is AAA blockbuster releases at least once a year. I say that at least once a year because they are releasing more than 4 first-party titles a year, at least if we're basing it off of what this year is, and they're finally getting into that groove. But at least one of those has to be a big thing that people are going to talk about. Starfield is that next venture. Halo Infinite was 2021's. I would say Starfield is 2023's. It has Todd Howard behind it, is the next big game that Bethesda Game Studio has made since Fallout 4. And the other thing, Perfect Dark. Perfect Dark is behind a brand new studio. It is their first game, so it's probably it could miss, but it has a lot of backing behind it. It has a lot of talent behind it. In terms of budget, that's kind of the next big one, is Perfect Dark. But they need to have one of these bigger blockbuster cultural impact things that people are going to be talking about, that it's heavily marketed. They need to have at least one of those every year, and hopefully every time it's good to great. The third part is to communicate this better, make sure people know, like, hey, this is from a smaller team, this is from a bigger team. Now, that's one I think that they probably could pass on, because they probably just want everybody to know that any Xbox first-party release is important. It's just going to be hard for people to distinguish, what's a big AAA blockbuster and what's a passion project. The fourth and final point is making deals with other partners and third parties to make exclusives for the platform, just like PlayStation does, and people will just judge that as an Xbox exclusive, and hey, I am glad that I have this console to play this big AAA game from another person that they are only publishing on this console for, but they are not going to go down that route, and if you want to know why that is, you can click the video there to discuss that. Though if the ABK deal fails, I don't know, they might. I kind of want to do a video about that too. So make sure you subscribe for those videos, as well as potentially the Xbox Showcase, reacting and talking about that. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments, and to be geek, be proud, be awesome.